Medical professionals of Reddit, what's the worst autistic related injury you've seen at your workplace? Nothing worse than dildos, vibrators and other objects stuck where the sun don't shine. One chap did say that he likes sticking things up his ass, and that's fair enough. But the strange excuses are usually the most entertaining part of it. Worst genital injury was a guy who drilled his scrotum with a cordless drill doing DIY. Don't secure your workpiece between your knees if you want to be sure to keep both testicles. Gentlemen. A guy came into the emergency department because his ass hurt after his boyfriend was fisting him. It had torn his bowel. He had to get a colostomy. It wasn't like life-ending or anything. But imagine going to the ED after 6 and getting told you're getting a ducking colostomy. Janitor heated petroleum jelly and injected it into his D with a syringe. He was trying to make his D bigger. He added more. Other janitors saw him and decided to do the same. So turns out with nowhere to go, petroleum jelly forms granulomas under the skin, which get infected. Word was the tip of his D and the base wouldn't get hard anymore. Only the middle. And abscesses formed, resulting in what was described as the D looking like maggots had bored tunnels through it. Janitor 1 was hospitalized for several weeks. As for Janitor 2, he ended up with several ulcerating wounds in his pelvic region. You could stick a finger in them, they were that big. Apparently injecting your D with petroleum jelly is fairly common. Some girls have also attempted to inject their boobs so give themselves implants. It has led to deaths because bits and pieces of it can dislodge and travel to the lungs. Don't do it. Labial hematoma. Couple had 60 times. Then got into a fight. He kicked her in the crotch. This burst a blood vessel in the labia, which made it swell to the size of a large pear. That it hurts. She used many colorful words to describe what she thought of him. Back in medical school I was on a surgery rotation with a classmate. Our first day we got split into groups. By chance. My first case was an appendectomy. By chance. His first case was helping deliver a jewel encrusted dildo from the rectum of a 250-pound guy. He was at the business end when it crowned and was responsible for catching as the surgeons pushed from above. I used to work weekend night shifts. Had a younger girl come in one weekend. Despite her age, she had a hip replacement and it was dislocated. ER put it back in and away she went. Next weekend, she's back again. Same thing. Third weekend in a row and there she is. Finally I ask what she's doing to dislocate her hip and she says her boyfriend keeps bending her leg back too far during sex. I told her to try different positions. Dentist here. In dental school definitely saw a girl with an inflamed palate that she was worried about an infection. Did some tests. Nothing looked infectious. Faculty member pulled us aside and was like, yeah, that's a bruise from deep throating. Might not be a major injury, but definitely memorable. And now my top rated comment is about overly rough blowjobs. To respond to a few comments, we actually saw this in oral pathology class. It can happen because of continuous trauma to the palate. Just like you could get a bruise on your arm with continuous hits even if they aren't too hard. I'd recommend swishing with a salt water rinse a couple times a day for a few days to help with swelling, and maybe take a break until it heals. Dude stuck a pencil up his urethra. Wood is porous. It got stuck. For a day, he couldn't pee around it, and initially that's what his complaint was. Urinary retention. Finally in the exam room when the doc asked him WTF with the eraser sticking out of his D did the guy fess up. He ended up needing surgery. He was also 70ish. Old enough to know better. Not my story but my mom's. She used to work in the oncology department of a hospital a while back. One day she comes home, sits me down, and says, "Syphilis in the eye. You always make sure your partner is clean. Don't take their word for it. I don't care what you do. Just syphilis in the eye." That's all I needed to hear. Edit. Thanks for the silver kind stranger. I tried to explain to my mom someone liked her advice that much but she didn't really get it. She is appreciative though. Broken D. Dude's testicles were the size of grapefruits. I assume the internal pudendal artery was pumping blood into them from somewhere. Was an MA then. Now in med school. Was a neat injury, but nothing we could do for him in urgent care. He needed surgery for sure. Did see a bottle stuck in a rectum x-ray as well. I'm not one to judge, Keep on freaking on, but don't put glass in your ass please. Countless cases of stuff stuck up the butt. Dildos, vibrators, cucumbers, toilet bowl brushes. If it's possible to get in the butt, someone has needed it surgically removed. Toilet bowl brush was the most shocking. However, the funniest was reconstructing a giant white, oddly realistic veiny cock on the back table to make sure they had pulled it all out. Edit. Pro tip. If you get something stuck up your butt, don't make up some fantastic story about naked light bulb changes. We know how it got there. You know how it got there. There's no shame in liking butt stuff. Just tell us your personal time went awry. 18-year-old kid had a cheap dildo break way up his ass. Was bleeding from his butt. Needed surgery. In my state you're not legally an adult until 19, so he had to call his mom for consent. And she demanded staying with him through his entire ER visit. Edit. His butt ate the entire dildo. Probably a solid 7-9 inches of plastic. Top 2 inches is what broke off. Also yes, the medical consent rules are screwy. Applies for sexual assault as well. Unless the parent was the suspected assailant. A coworker was getting divorced. One night his soon-to-be ex called about something and she could tell he was having a bad day. So to cheer him up she told him all about how while she and her new boyfriend were having sex he shoved a dildo up her ass and it just got sucked up. After failed attempts to remove it they went to the ER where she got surgery to remove it. After surgery doctors sanitized the dildo and returned it to her. This story did not make him feel better. I've seen a crystal clear imprint of a clothing iron to the ass. The thought process was something like, if candle wax equals kinky, ironing your ass equals mega kinky? I don't know. Also a pair of junkies got high and shot heroin in the guy's D and we had to fill it the whole thing. He was distraught about the size difference. I'm a paramedic. He recently had a gentleman shoot himself in the head of his D with a handgun. Edit. I realize it's not really a sexual injury per se, and the OP probably wanted more I fell on this and it got stuck in my ass type injuries. But this felt relevant lol. Mini lava lamp stuck in the rectum. Power cord was sticking out like a tail. Exotic. Special ordered venomous spider up the ass. Guy called an ambulance because he wasn't sure if he could put bug bite cream up there too, as the packaging said for external use only. Lost entire transverse section of necrotic bowel. Lived, but poops in a bag now. Typical, not a medical professional, but I had a friend who was a hospital pharmacist. He said a patient came in with a coffee thermos in his ass. Cap first. He got the rest of the thermos out but the cap stayed. After a couple days he finally decided to go to the hospital because he couldn't get it out. The cap ended up festering bacteria and he had part of his colon removed. Now that guy is in his 30s with a colostomy bag. My stepdad is an ER doctor in the only hospital in the city I was raised in. There was no place else to go when the 6-swing my idiot boyfriend hung on drywall ceiling came crashing down and I broke my tailbone. He was also there 6 months later when that same boyfriend let go of my hips as he was going at me pretty hard from behind, sending my over the edge of the bed and head first into a desk. My mother worked in an ER and told me a story about a guy who was high on angel dust and couldn't get it up. His friend told him to stick a chicken bone in his D and he'd be able to have a 6. He shoved it in knuckle end first and shredded the head of his D. My friend works at an ER in a small rural area in Canada. Apparently this young guy comes in and has a can of Axe body spray stuck in his rectum. He was extremely embarrassed and his excuse was that he accidentally sat on it. Kinda sex related. On Andrew's AFB in the 80s a guy was caught molesting his daughter by his wife. As the cops arrived he sat on his front concrete steps and hammered his junk off. My mom worked on him in the emergency room. He still ended up in jail. I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone in this thread for making sure my genitalia never work again. Right. Embarrassing story from the patient end here. Few years ago I was stroking the weasel. I have some neodymium magnets on my desk. Why? I was dismantling old hard drives. That's why. I bumped the desk. Sent the magnets flying. Saw in slow motion they were on a tandem collision course with MR. Willie and panicked and tried to dodge. I rolled a ducking one on that check. 2 magnets met with my foreskin in between. These were tiny, strong magnets. and I couldn't separate them myself after 10-15 minutes of trying. So at 10:30ish at night I went to my neighbor and said, hey, I need to go to the hospital, and he said, when? Now. UHH. Okay man, and we got to the ER. I checked myself in, and when I told the nurse what was wrong he lost it and cracked up. I rolled my eyes and said, yay, whatever, just get them apart. Okay, guess WHO didn't know hemostats were magnetic, neither of US. So it took Nurse Chuckles a good 10 minutes to secure the tips around the magnets and pull them apart through fumbling and trying his sweetheart's darnedest to contain the laughing. He got them apart, I retrieved my magnets, and he had to leave the room and laugh down the hall. Another nurse popped her head in as I was examining the damage. Nothing horrible, just a couple of bruises, but I didn't see her, and she gasped and caused me to damn near fall out of the bed. She was embarrassed, I was embarrassed, she ran, and then laughs a lot came back, along with security because apparently the chick thought I was masturbating. That was fun to explain. Security didn't really believe me till Nitro Boy had to confirm it through more laughing. I was finally discharged with now half the hospital staff laughing at me and a referral to a urologist for a checkup. I never did tell my neighbor the truth about that trip. Maybe it's about time I do. Anyway, hope you all have a good laugh over it. In retrospect, yes, it was hilarious. Edit, Silver. Thank you, kind stranger. You popped my cherry. My family is constantly in and out of our local ER. Last time I went there for a concussion, there was a man in there with his wife for heart palpitations during coitus. He started having a slow heart attack while they were having sex and they ended up admitting him. There was also a girl in there, high as the ducking sun, claiming she'd had sex with multiple different guys, like 3 or 6 inches, and gotten pregnant from all of them, but that her friends had kidnapped her afterward to San Diego and given her a peculiar brownie with pot in it that I didn't know was pot, and the pot brownie made her lose her baby and now she was dying. According to the conversation the doctors kept having with her, she'd come in 3 times in a month claiming she was pregnant and worried about her baby. Each time they tested and all tests proved negative. She started her period and it caused her to insist she'd lost the multiple men's baby, and that the pot brownie in San Diego was at fault 3 days before. She started wailing when they gave her meds to calm her down, claiming they were killing her baby with pot and injections, and that she'd call up her friends who kidnapped her and forced her to eat this deadly pot brownie as proof. I'm not sure what ended up happening to her and her apparently psychotic break, but I'm hoping they got her some help because she was clearly out of it. I had a patient come into the ER with runs of VTACH, dangerous arrhythmia, because his boyfriend sprinkled methamphetamine powder on a dildo and stuck it in his ass. Very absorbent up there, and suddenly your heart is crapping out at a rate of 220. Dissected vertebral artery from oral 6, essentially a big brain hemorrhage. Did not end well, either. Infected penile implant. His dong looked like a purple tall boy beer can. They had to take him to the OR, literally fillet his man parts, take out the implant, and wash it all out. Worst part, they left it open for several days. Ick. Uncle-in-law, anesthesiologist, had a patient come in that had poured concrete in his own ass. While trying to make a custom dildo, they had to chisel the concrete out of his rectum. Worked at a physical therapy clinic for years. 78-year-old man herniated a disc in his neck eating out his girlfriend. He was a long-time patient and friend of the therapist, so we got the whole story. Our patient, P, was old, rich, and single, and loved all the sleazy bits that came with it. One day his 39-year-old girlfriend asked him to return a favor, so P goes down on a woman for the first time ever at age 78, not really knowing what he was doing. He went at her like a dog drinking water, his words. Few moments later he felt a pop and his arm went numb. He came to us with a nearly useless left arm about 2 days later. My boss was laughing so hard during the eval that I went in the treatment room to check on him. P insisted I stay and hear the whole story. P died a couple months later from something unrelated. I miss that crusty old bastard a lot. I bet there are some good excuses too. I was cooking naked and dropped a package of POTUS and it broke open and I slipped on one and landed just wrong and one went up my rectum. Yeah. Not a doctor, but my friend had a girl go down on him while they were cooking. She apparently had been handling some hot peppers before she decided to pin him to the wall. They didn't go to the hospital, but he swears he was super close to going. Mood was ruined after that. My mom is a secretary at a hospital, so she has heard a few stories. Apparently a person had come in with a carrot stuck up their ass, saying that it got stuck because they fell on it while they were cooking naked. Nurse here. Guy came in with a condom sheathed cucumber up his ass. Was fully comfortable admitting that he and his partner were messing around in the bedroom and just went a bit too far. Wasn't embarrassed at all. Also, I've seen a guy on the wards with one of those plastic balls you get in a ball pit stuck up there. Was working an ER rotation at a major DC hospital while getting my EMT. I wasn't around at the onset, but a gentleman came in complaining about swelling down there and a nurse gave a cursory look. She immediately took him into a private room, closed the door and came over to tell us what was going on. The guy apparently liked the feel of weight on his balls when he got off, so he had put his wang and balls through the center of a 5-pound weight plate, like you would put on free weights, and gotten off. He then fell asleep. 5 hours later he woke up, swollen and unable to pull himself out of the weight. He had somehow taken public transportation, or walked, with a 5-pound weight plate in his pants all the way to the hospital. We spent the next 30 minutes trying to reduce the swelling by putting crushed ice up against him without success. Finally the charge nurse called DC Fems to get assistance from the heavy rescue squad to cut through the plate. We took the guy into the psych room, closed the door and proceeded to cut it off, it being the weight, not his manhood. The entire time having to keep applying more ice to the plate so that it didn't become hot enough to just cauterize his groin. The other patients really didn't appreciate hearing a buzzsaw, screaming and seeing all of the ER staff giggling. Of course the poor guy also had to deal with a constant stream of doctors, nurses, techs having to go in there to check on something and see what it was all about. So I have a patient who came in due to a rash on his D. When asking what may have caused the rash he states, "I had really rough, like really rough." I just nod my head and inform the doctor. We just give each a look of WTF and she proceeded to go speak with the patient. The patient told her the true reason why he has a rash, and it was because he dry humped this girl so roughly that he basically gave himself carpet burn on his D from his pants. Had a guy stick a whole chorizo sausage in his rectum. When the EMTs called in with the chief complaint, before I hung up I told them to bring some eggs. The ER doctor attempted removal but wasn't able to grab a hold of the end. The patient ended up being transferred and needed surgery for sausage removal. This 26-year-old decided to be circumcised. His doctor told him not to have a six. He didn't listen. It peeled like a banana. Oof. We had a poor girl come into the ER a few weeks ago. Simpler 6 went wrong case and she was basically bleeding out from her V. They think she had some weak arteries down there and one or more just ruptured. A young woman came in complaining of pink eye. Looked just like pink-eyed. So we cultured the discharge coming from her eye. Turns out it was chlamydia of the eye. The best was informing the doctor of the results. The puzzling look on the doctor's face as she wondered how the PT was able to get chlamydia in her eye. Then later the look of disgust on her face as she realized how it happened. Wife found out hubby was cheating and slashed at his groin with a knife. Scrotum torn open, degloving one of his testes. I forgot I was browsing by new. I was like, those comments will be fun to read, and then reality kicked in. Had a couple come into the ED via ambulance. Her in S white terry cloth bathrobe just soaked in blood down the front, and him wrapped in a shower curtain, clutching his junk. Turns out that showers are slippery. She hit the soap dish with her chin while attempting fellatio. Lots and lots of tiny stitches resulted. So, way back in medical school, all of us had to do a 2-month rotation in OB-GYN. This rotation was split up into a few weeks of labor ward, a couple weeks of gynecologic surgery, and a couple weeks of the OB-GYN ER. Our major county hospital had a small, separate ER just for pregnant women and those with purely gynecologic complaints, to relieve some pressure off the medical and surgical ERs. So, I'm sitting in the OB-GYN ER with the residents one night, and at about 2 AM, we get an ambulance crew bringing in a youngish woman who is absolutely howling in pain. The residents go to examine her and tell me to get a quick report from the EMTs, who had already talked to both the women and her boyfriend, who they said was not coming to the ER because he was busy talking to the police. By the EMTs, the woman and her boyfriend had just been at her house to hook up. They had just finished their business and, as folks are wont to do, decided to light up a crack pipe to share it while sitting naked on their couch. The boyfriend apparently went out to his car to grab something and inadvertently bumped the headlights switch. This causes the lights to flash, which the woman apparently interpreted as a cops are coming sign for some reason, and shoved the lit crack pipe into her V. Obviously, this was excruciatingly painful, causing her to tense up and start flailing trying to get it out, which then causes part of it to shatter, so now she has hot, broken glass in her V. I don't have a V, personally, but the story made my imaginary V hurt. Girl was in agony with the worst case of herpes I've ever seen. Her partner had a cold sore on his lip and ate her out. Was working at the ER when a highly attractive college-age lady came in to be seen. Overheard her explaining to the trig nurse that her clit piercing was missing. One of the PAs had to digitally explore and investigate. The piercing was located and pulled out. A guy who, after hearing his girlfriend had never been with anyone who was uncircumcised, took it upon himself to perform said circumcision with box cutters. He was in the within the hour getting the Twinkie put back into the package. Then there was this guy who came to ER with a long English cucumber up his ass. His explanation was don't trust two skanks in an RV. Not my case, but the people sticking things up butt stories are always amusing. And I can guarantee it now that at least 60% of this thread will be that. People really like sticking things up their butts. There are quite a few I can think of, but the one that sticks out to me is one time we had a lovely young couple come into the hospital wrapped in towels. We soon found out that the couple were trying to have sex in the ocean and the suction from the water in the V caused the D to get stuck. It took about 30 minutes for the separation. Adam Hills mentioned a Welsh forensics tech in one of his stand-up shows who had run across a pair of heroin addicts. The male had so many veins collapse, he couldn't inject any more heroin. So the gentleman decided to inject sugar into his D to make it stiff and hard, to inject more heroin. He died. A little while later, the girl died as well, but they couldn't figure out why. She'd gone clean and stopped doing drugs. They didn't solve the mystery until the autopsy, when they found his necrotic D had fallen off inside of her and gotten stuck. Don't do drugs, kids. Does it count if I saw it prior to the doctor? Did some AV work for a friend of mine that managed a swing club. He was having sex with some girl on this sort of rolling gunny bed out in the middle of the lounge area with like 50 plus people enjoying the show. They accidentally slid off the bed and in the jumble and ensuing thump on the ground, audible pop was heard. He fractured his D. That pop, less than shut more than poor guy's junk almost immediately looked like a deflated purple balloon. This was many years ago now and you can rest assured that I never let old broke D forget. That is what best friends offer, right? Obligatory not me, but my mom was an ER nurse. She comes home and tells early teen me about a guy who comes in with a bleeding D and a girlfriend with a concussion. Apparently she had a grand mal seizure while giving him a blowjob in the kitchen. To get her off he beat her on the head with a frying pan. She also told me about a guy who came in with an upright vacuum stuck to his groin. Apparently his D was wrapped around the brush bar. Woman came in saying a friend put a cat toy in my V 2 years ago and I think it is still there. It was still there. CT scan show a dumbbell shaped toy with a bell on one end. Unfortunately the other end was some sort of mesh and her body had grown into it. Everything in her pelvis was infected. She ended up losing some V, colon and bladder. Death. Paramedic in SoCal and about 8-10 years ago I ran a call that scarred my brain. Call comes in as an unresponsive male. When we arrive we walk into this bedroom and the guy is slumped over the edge of the bed. Feet still on the ground. It's a bit dark and I notice what looks like a third leg. Sure enough it wasn't a leg. It's his D touching the floor. He had a massive heart attack while boning and died. The blood pooled in his wanger and filled that thing like a balloon. Dude went out with the biggest D in the world. Pretty impressive. RIP. I work with a doctor and he tells us all the weird things he saw as a resident. My favorite story was a couple came in with a pool noodle stuck up both their asses. Like the girl had the one side of the pool noodle stuck in her ass and the guy had the other side stuck in his ass. While doing EMT training hours, my boss got a call to a construction site for a guy who somehow sat on a power drill that turned on. The drill bit chewed through his upper leg and butt, tore through his colon, prostate, and scrotum. No, poor fellow didn't make it, but at that point, it was probably for the best. Not my call, but a paramedic was called to a 20-something male living in a ski resort town having groin pains. Arrived to find his D completely necrotic. His buddies had bet him that he couldn't stick it in a snowman for an hour. Perfect example of winning the battle but losing the war. We get inmates at my hospital because we're right down the road. They like to inflict injuries upon themselves to get out and spend a day here. The best from the inmates was a guy stuck a razor blade up his urethra, then proceeded to shove it up farther with a pen. The pen put a hole in his urethra and of course the razor shredded. I'm a firefighter paramedic. Broken D. Bent at a right angle about halfway. It's the second time he hit it. His wife was on top and got carried away. It looked like they sacrificed a chicken on the bed. Young girl brought in by ambulance with some veal bleeding and hypovolemic shock. Apparently BF tore open her V during row 6. Couldn't get much detail about what really happened, so we had to guesstimate the extent of her injury and spent time getting tests. Well, it was a laceration along one side of her V, with severed artery, which caused bleeding into tissue surrounding her V and uterus, leading to a huge hematoma in the soft tissue and pelvic cavity. When BF came into the ER, he had a smirk cause he thought he ducked so good his GF passed out, but when we gave him the news he looked like he'd probably passed out right there and then, too. From a security guard that worked on the ER night shift. The difference between Barbie and G.I. Joe dolls is that Barbie arms don't articulate well and can make a big T. Someone learned that the hard way. Had a dude put a plastic tube in his pecker for a permanent hard-on, and no, he couldn't be normal and put it down the urethra. Bastard went surgical and inserted IT. Worked for 1 months before he came in to see us. The other was a guy with a shot glass up his ass. It broke. Back in medical school, a lady came to the ER with pelvic pain and thought her husband had left something in her V after a hard night of Wild 6, drinking, and drugs. There was a confirmed foreign body in the stirrups, so we had her stand up and bear down before we were willing to remove it manually. Into the attending's hand fell her pet canary.